Sophie stepped out of the glass doors of the fertility clinic, her hand resting on her swollen belly. The sun blazed above the Dallas skyline, but her attention was focused on her phone, reading a text from her husband, Noah. Meeting ran late. Sorry, babe. Just head home. She didn't notice the black van creeping up behind her until the tires screamed and the van came to a screeching halt. The next second, 2 masked men burst out. She barely had time to gasp before strong arms grabbed her from both sides. "Let go of me," she screamed, kicking and flailing, her purse hitting the sidewalk. A woman in a nurse's uniform froze in place, dropping her iced coffee as she watched. A man walking his dog hesitated, then turned away quickly, pretending not to see. No one moved. No one helped. Sophie's screams grew louder, more panicked. "I'm pregnant! Help me!" But it was as if the street had gone mute. The masked men wrestled her toward the van. She clawed at the edge of the open door, leaving bloody scratches on the metal as they forced her inside. One of the men slammed the door behind her. The van jerked into motion, tires spinning across the pavement as it disappeared down the road. Across the street, dressed in a crisp white blazer, Lena leaned against a bench outside a smoothie bar, sipping her iced coffee through a straw. She watched the scene with quiet satisfaction, her eyes hidden behind designer sunglasses. As the van pulled away, she gave a single nod to the driver. No smile, just quiet confirmation. Her hand slid into her coat pocket, and she walked away without looking back. Inside the van, Sophie's hands were zip-tied, and her legs kicked wildly as she tried to twist free. One of the men shoved her back against the metal wall. Her voice cracked from screaming. "My husband will find you. He'll pay whatever you want." Her voice trembled, but it was laced with a desperate hope. The man sitting opposite her leaned forward. His face was covered, but his voice wasn't. It was cold, matter of fact. "He already paid us," he said, "to make sure you never come back." The words landed like a blade. Sophie blinked, stunned. "You're lying." "We don't lie for free," he said, then yanked a dirty cloth over her eyes and tied it tight behind her head. She screamed again, louder this time, but the sound bounced uselessly against the van walls. No one could hear her out here. Not anymore. The van drove for hours. She lost all sense of direction. Her wrists burned where the plastic ties bit into. Her skin and her knees shook from the bumpy road. Every jolt sent a ripple of fear through her stomach. The baby kicked once, then went still. Sophie lowered her head, breathing heavily, whispering to her unborn child, "I've got you. Stay with me, please." No one answered her, not even the men in the front. At one point, the van stopped briefly. She heard muffled voices, maybe a change of drivers, maybe fuel. Then the van moved again. The air grew hotter and drier. She could smell dust and engine oil. Wherever they were going, it wasn't anywhere near home. Her mind raced through possibilities. Who could help her? Her sister was out of state. Her friends had grown distant ever since Lena showed up. And Noah had looked her in the eye, just yesterday, and said he loved her, had even kissed her forehead while Lena wasn't around. That kiss meant nothing now. Nothing. The van finally came to a stop. The door opened and rough hands grabbed her, pulling her down from the van. Her feet touched dry dirt. She smelled hay, manure, and old rust. A door creaked open, metal on wood, and she was dragged inside. Someone yanked the blindfold off. She blinked against the dim light. The room was bare. Wooden beams, a filthy mattress, a single bucket in the corner. A camera blinked red in the ceiling corner. Her heart pounded. "Where am I?" she gasped. "Somewhere your husband doesn't care to look," the taller man said. He turned and slammed the heavy door behind him. The lock clicked. She ran to it, pounded with both fists, but the sound only echoed. She collapsed backward onto the mattress, panting, clutching her stomach. Her hands shook as she whispered, "Please, someone, anyone." Outside, Dust clouds rolled past the lonely barn as the sun dipped toward the horizon. Inside, Sophie curled into herself, the baby shifting inside her, and asked again, through trembling lips, "Where are you taking me?" But no one answered. The door slammed shut behind her again, but this time they didn't bother to blindfold her. Sophie sat motionless on the stained mattress, breathing through her mouth to block out the mold and rot. Her arms ached from being tied for hours. Her lips were cracked. She looked around slowly. Wooden walls with peeling paint, a rusted chair, and a single dim bulb hanging above. In the far corner, a rat scurried across the floor, disappearing behind a rusted cabinet. There was no mirror, no clock, no window. Just a bucket, and that blinking red light in the ceiling corner, watching. Footsteps crunched outside. Through a crack in the wall near the ceiling, she could hear the muffled voices of the men who'd brought her. One voice said, "She's carrying the air. The mistress doesn't want her dead, just gone." Another replied, "You sure she won't change her mind? That woman's crazy. She just wants the spotlight. And the baby. Not the wife." Sophie's throat tightened. Her whole body froze. That was confirmation. This wasn't a random attack. This was planned. Paid for. Noah hadn't just looked away. He had handed her over. She closed her eyes, trying to block the voices, but they kept coming, cutting deeper with every sentence. Miles away, in a sleek glass penthouse, Lena stood beneath a crystal chandelier, surrounded by white roses, satin ribbons, and a crowd of influencers, editors, and society women. Photographers buzzed like bees as she posed beside a three-tier cake shaped like a bassinet. She wore a fitted lilac dress, her hands delicately resting on the round shape beneath the silk, a fake baby bump. Noah stood beside her, his jaw tight, smiling when prompted, his hand resting gently on Lena's back. He hadn't spoken to Sophie in weeks, not publicly. He hadn't mentioned her name. When a guest asked where the wife was, Lena laughed. "Oh, she's in a wellness retreat. We're weeks away from meeting our baby boy." Sophie, alone in the farmhouse, hadn't eaten since yesterday. The tray they'd slid through the door held cold beans, half a bread roll, and a cracked plastics cup of water. She ignored the food. Her stomach cramped hard enough to steal her breath. She doubled over, holding the side of her belly, whispering, "Not now. Please, not now." The pain came in waves, sharp and low. She lay back against the mattress, breathing slowly, tears leaking from her eyes as her hands pressed gently against her belly. The baby kicked. At least he was still moving. That was something. Later that night, she crawled toward the bucket in the corner and nearly retched from the smell. But when she leaned against the wall to steady herself, she looked up and saw it, a camera, tiny but visible, blinking from the ceiling beam. She stood slowly, balancing against the wall. Her lip curled. "You're watching me?" she shouted. "Do you think this will break me?" She waited. No one responded. The light blinked again. The next day, one of the kidnappers brought in food. He was younger than the others, maybe early 20s, with nervous eyes and messy hair. He wore a hoodie and avoided looking at her as he placed the tray on the floor. "Hey," Sophie said hoarsely. He paused, just slightly. "Please," she said. "My baby, he's not safe here. I'm not asking for much. Just call someone. Call a hospital. You don't even have to say who you are." He didn't reply, but his eyes flicked to hers, then back to the floor. "They lied to you," she whispered. "Whatever they paid you, it won't be enough when something goes wrong." Still nothing. He walked out and locked the door. But that night, Sophie saw a folded blanket shoved through the door crack. Clean. Soft. No note. She unfolded it and wrapped it around herself, staring at the ceiling camera. Back in the city, Lena sat in a velvet chair during a podcast interview, laughing softly as the host asked about her journey to motherhood. "Sometimes, life just hands you a miracle," she said. "I think everything happens for a reason. Even heartbreak." The comments online praised her resilience. "Glow-up queen. She deserves this happiness." Wife was unstable anyway. The next morning, a news alert flashed on a local station. Sophie Gray has been reported missing for over a week. Family sources claim she checked herself into an exclusive rehab clinic for prenatal mental health concerns. No photo. No further details. The story buried beneath celebrity news. Sophie screamed when the pain returned. The cramps lasted longer, this time. She paced the room, one hand on her lower back, the other cradling her stomach. "Breathe. You have to breathe." She leaned against the door and pounded with her fist. "Help me!" The door didn't open, but a minute later, the same young man returned. No tray, no food, just him. "Are you in labor?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," she said, "but I need to see a doctor. Now." He looked over his shoulder, then back at her. "I'm not supposed to talk to you." "Then don't," she said. "Just do something. Anything." He hesitated. "If they find out I helped—" "You said the mistress didn't want me dead, right? Then you better hope nothing happens to this baby while you're standing there doing nothing." He stared at her. The silence stretched. Then he turned and walked out. Sophie slid down the wall and buried her face in her hands, whispering the same words again and again. "Hold on. Just hold on." The rain came in sudden sheets, battering the roof of the farmhouse so hard it muffled the sound of footsteps. Thunder rolled as shadows moved outside. Sophie stood in the middle of the room, arms wrapped around herself, trembling. The door burst open and Dario stepped in, soaked, breathless. "Don't scream," he whispered. She didn't. "I don't have much time. I set the barn on fire. It'll draw the others away for maybe 10 minutes. "You what?" she whispered, stunned. "No more talking. Move." He grabbed her hand and pulled her out the back exit. They ran across mud and broken ground, her bare feet slipping, her belly heavy with every stride. Dario helped her into an old truck hidden beneath a torn canvas. The engine coughed to life. Smoke already curled into the sky behind them. Sophie didn't ask where they were going. She didn't care. She just focused on breathing, on staying conscious, on staying alive. They drove through the night, twisting through empty back roads and winding hills until the city lights disappeared entirely. By dawn, the truck pulled into a clearing hidden by dense trees. A rusted trailer sat crooked on broken cinder blocks. Dario stepped out first, checking every corner with a flashlight. "Safe enough," he said, then opened her door. Inside the trailer, the air was thick with dust and old fabric, but it was dry. The bed had a mattress, a space heater, hummed faintly. On a small table sat a laptop and a dusty stack of notebooks. Sophie collapsed onto the bed and tried to sit up, but Dario raised a hand. "I have a sister," he said, voice low. "She was 15 when a man twice her age promised to help her get out of foster care. He made her think she mattered. Then when she got pregnant, he disappeared. His wife paid to have her shipped off to another state. Alone. No name, no support. She almost died in a motel tub." Sophie's breath caught. "I couldn't let that happen to you," he said. Then he turned and left her alone. Later, when the pain faded to a dull ache and her hands stopped shaking, she saw the laptop open and humming. Dario must have left it for her. She approached it slowly. No passwords on the desktop. Her fingers hesitated on the keys. She typed in her husband's company portal, noahgrayenterprises.com. The login page blinked back at her. Without thinking, she entered her old access. S. Gray. Password, Eleanor, 1922. Their wedding date, and her grandmother's. Name. The page loaded. She paused, hands frozen, then clicked into the HR portal. Her eyes scanned documents, skipping over employee files until she found one tagged, Lena Health Docs PDF. She opened it. The ultrasound was fake. The blood work? Missing? The attending doctor's license number? Didn't exist. Sophie leaned forward. Heart racing. Her eyes darted to another folder, transfers. Inside it, a file titled KDNPR Team Bravo PDF. Her stomach churned as she opened it. A transaction. $150,000 wired from Gray Trust Holdings to Tetrac Logistics. Memo. Consulting services. Urgent. The date matched the day she was abducted. Another folder. Custody contracts. She clicked. A scanned document appeared. Noah's signature alongside a notarized statement transferring full guardianship of Sophie's unborn child to Lena Morgan. In the event of mental instability or disappearance of biological mother. Sophie's hands hovered above the keys, trembling. The baby kicked. She whispered, "You were never supposed to survive me." A door creaked behind her. Dario stepped in quietly. In his hand, a flash drive. He set it on the table and plugged it in. A file loaded onto the screen. No words. Just a 90-second video. Lena, walking into the same fertility clinic. In heels, full makeup, silk dress. She stepped into the hallway, turned her back to the camera, then lifted her dress. Sophie blinked. A silicone bump slid down her thighs as Lena peeled it off like a costume. She tossed it into her designer purse and walked out, straightening. Her lipstick in the mirror. No nurse stopped her, no staff questioned her. The entire visit had been a performance. Sophie watched it again. And again. The final frame froze on Lena's reflection, her smile just slightly off. Calculated. Cold. Sophie didn't speak. Her lips parted, but no words came. Her body shook. But not from fear anymore. Not from pain. Something else. Something colder. She turned toward the corner of the trailer. A plastic baby bassinet stood under a cracked window, untouched. Dario must have brought it while she slept. A small pink blanket folded neatly inside. She walked over to it, sat on the bed beside it, and stared for a long time. They had tried to steal her child. Rewrite her identity. Replace her existence with a lie that smiled for the cameras and posed for reporters. But Lena hadn't planned for this. For a kidnapped mother who'd survive. For a boy she couldn't fake into the world. For a betrayal that Sophie would one day burn down. She stood, walking slowly back to the laptop. Her voice cracked when she finally spoke. Save everything. I want every file backed up in 5 places. Dario nodded. You're not running anymore? He asked. Sophie didn't answer. She just stared at the screen. Then she whispered, No, I'm hunting. If you're hooked on stories where the truth fights back, don't forget to subscribe for more emotional twists like this one. Sophie sat at the edge of the trailer bed, cradling the burner phone in her hand like it might shatter if she gripped it. Too hard. Her fingers hovered over the keypad, debating every number. Then finally she dialed. The line rang twice before a familiar voice picked up. Sophie? Natalie sounded breathless. Oh my God! Where are you? Everyone thinks you're dead or lost somewhere in Arizona. Sophie let out a shaky breath. I can't talk long. I just needed to hear a real voice. Someone I trust. Of course, Natalie said quickly. I've been worried sick. Are you safe? Are you... She paused. Is the baby okay? We're alive, Sophie replied. But I need your help. I don't know who else to turn to. There was a silence on the line, just long enough to sound wrong. Okay, Natalie finally said. Just send me a pin. I'll send food, money, whatever you need. I'll get you help. Sophie wanted to believe her. She really did. She hung up without saying more and sent a location pin from a nearby gas station 2 towns over. An hour later, a cardboard box arrived at the side of the trailer. No return name, no label. Inside, canned fruit, energy bars, prenatal vitamins, and a single letter from Natalie. Stay strong. You're not alone. Sophie held the letter to her chest for a moment, then packed everything carefully in a duffel bag. Something in her chest eased, but only briefly. That night, she and Dario moved again. He had friends who owed him favors, and by morning, they arrived at an abandoned stone church nestled deep in the outskirts of a ghost town. The chapel had long since been decommissioned. The stained glass was cracked, the pews worn down by weather and time. Still, it was quiet, safe, hidden. Sophie stood in the sanctuary, running her hands along the wooden bench tops. She sat in one of the pews near the front, where a faded hymnal still lay open, its pages curling with age. When she lifted it, something slid beneath the wood, a bundle of letters wrapped in twine. She hesitated, then untied them slowly. The handwriting was sharp, careful. The ink faded in places. One letter began with "My dearest Lena," followed by paragraphs filled with phrases like "You are more than she ever was," and "Once my son is ready, you'll take your rightful place." Another letter had instructions, timelines, dates, mention of a trust fund, a clinic in Austin, and veiled references to removing Sophie before she becomes a liability. Sophie read every line, her hands trembling as they flipped through the pages. It wasn't just Noah. It had never been just him. Lena had been part of this family's plans from the beginning, before the wedding, before the pregnancy, before Sophie had ever known what power looked like behind luxury doors. Lena hadn't seduced Noah. She'd been groomed into the family, first as the father's secret mistress, then repackaged and elevated to wife material once Sophie had served her purpose. The betrayal was deeper than she'd ever imagined. Later that evening, Sophie unpacked the food from Natalie's care box. Her stomach was tight with nausea from the day's tension, but she forced herself to eat. The canned fruit tasted off, sour, metallic. She pushed it away after 2 spoonfuls. Something wrong? Dario asked as he tinkered with the generator wiring outside. Just tired, Sophie mumbled. I'll lie down. But 20 minutes later, the cramps began. Not like before, sharper, stabbing. A cold sweat broke across her forehead. Her mouth went dry. The room spun as she tried to reach for the door. Dario, she gasped, collapsing onto the wooden floorboards. Her hands clutched her belly. Something's wrong. He was at her side in seconds, lifting her into his arms. Her vision blurred as her body jerked from another wave of pain. The baby? She whispered. I've got you, he said. Hold on. They didn't risk calling 911. Instead, Dario sped down the back roads to a rural ER he knew from his sister's past. The hospital was small, worn, and no one asked questions. Sophie was rushed into a dimly lit room where nurses hooked her to monitors and IVs. The baby's heartbeat echoed in the room, steady, strong. But Sophie's vitals were erratic. Dehydration, chemical imbalance, suspected poisoning. One of the nurses pulled Dario aside quietly. She's lucky. A few hours later, this could have been fatal. Whatever she ate was laced with something synthetic. A muscle relaxant, maybe. Hard to say. But not an accident. Dario stared through the hospital window at Sophie, now resting in a cot, pale but alive. When she finally stirred, the first thing she asked was, "The baby?" "He's okay," Dario said. "You're both okay." She nodded slowly. Her voice was hoarse. "Natalie." He didn't need to ask. She already knew. There was no more room for doubt. She sat up, her hands gripping the sides of the bed. "No more running. she whispered. Dario stepped closer. Then what do we do? She looked at him, her eyes clearer than they'd been in days. We go back. Not as victims, not to beg. He didn't smile. He just nodded. Then we do it your way. She leaned back against the pillows, her hand resting protectively over her belly. Her body still ached, and her trust was shattered, in ways that would never fully heal. But her resolve was intact. She had been kidnapped, erased, nearly killed. Betrayed by a friend, a husband, a family legacy. But now, with every beat of her baby's heart echoing in the room, one thing was certain. They had tried to erase her story. She was going to rewrite it. The woman who stepped off the Greyhound bus in downtown Dallas didn't resemble Sophie Gray. Her once honey blonde hair was now a short, dark auburn bob. She wore oversized sunglasses, plain jeans, and carried nothing but a leather folder and a second-hand purse. The ID in her wallet read Mara Levinson, born in Denver. Her gait was slower, but not from fear. Every step was deliberate. She didn't flinch when she passed a digital billboard showing Lena Morgan smiling beside Noah, captioned, "New Life, New Legacy, Gray Foundation Gala this weekend." She just kept walking. 2 days later, a set of anonymous investors quietly bought a 4.2% stake in Gray Trust Holdings. No one looked twice. It was just another LLC with overseas addresses, part of the daily churn of corporate movement. Sophie had no board seat, no voting power, just enough of a stake to sit in the room, unnoticed, and receive internal communications. That was all she needed. She found the OBGYN listed in Lena's medical records operating out of a wellness spa on the edge of Fort Worth. His name was Dr. Bradley Kerrigan. His license still valid, barely. He hadn't seen Sophie in over a year. When she walked into his office under her new identity, he didn't recognize her. Not until she dropped a USB drive on his desk and played the first clip, Lena entering. His clinic, then emerging 15 minutes later with a new pregnancy update she would show off to the media. He paled when she pulled out a phone. "This is being recorded. Every word." "You can't blackmail a physician." "I'm not," she interrupted. "I'm offering you a chance to confess before the medical board comes knocking with a criminal complaint and a civil lawsuit. You'll lose your license either way. One path lets you sleep at night. The other ends in court." It didn't take long. By the time she left, she had a video recording. Dr. Kerrigan admitting he falsified Lena's pregnancy records in exchange for hush money from Lena's personal account and a donation to his clinic. Next was the gala. The Gray Foundation's Mothers of Tomorrow charity event was held in the Oakwood Grand Ballroom, all white lilies and chandeliers. Staff bustled in early, servers, camera crews, floral vendors. Sophie blended in among them with a catering apron, clipboard, and a hairnet. No one checked her badge twice. She moved through the venue silently, noting exits, the AV control station, the rotating slideshow setup. Everything she needed. That night, guests poured in. Politicians, donors, media. Lena arrived fashionably late, gliding through the glass doors in a silk champagne gown. She placed one perfectly manicured hand on her prominent bump, the other clutching Noah's arm. The photographers snapped away. Sophie stood near the kitchen doors, a tray of hors d'oeuvres in her hand, her eyes locked on the stage. Lena took the mic, her voice syrupy and soft. "We're so blessed to welcome our baby boy soon." This foundation was born out of love, sacrifice, and the journey to motherhood. Every woman here knows the miracle of what we carry. Sophie didn't blink. She waited. Later, as Lena circled the crowd thanking donors, Sophie slipped into the AV booth. In her pocket was a flash drive labeled Slideshow Backup. She plugged it into the laptop already synced to the ballroom's massive LED display. Then she walked out like nothing happened. The next morning, the Gray Trust hosted a press conference in the same building. Noah stood behind a white podium, speaking confidently to a room full of reporters and cameras. As of next month, Lena and I will welcome our son, and with him, a new era of integrity and innovation at Gray Holdings. We're proud to lead this company into the future. That's when every screen in the conference hall flickered. First came Lena's recorded confession. Blurred, but her voice unmistakable. I was never pregnant. The bump? It was silicone. But it was the only way to keep the foundation's image intact. No one believes in a woman who can't give birth, right? Then the screen cut to drone footage. Lena entering the clinic, carrying the bump in her purse, walking out minutes later. Then a PDF flashed on screen. The forged custody document. Sophie's name scratched out, replaced with Lena's, notarized and dated. The room erupted. Journalists shouted questions. One reporter near the front yelled, "Is this real? Is the baby even yours?" Lena gasped, her hand flying to her chest. She stumbled backward, tried to grab Noah's arm, then collapsed. A security guard called for a medic. Noah, frozen, hissed at the AV team. "Shut it down! Now!" But it was too late. The live stream had already gone viral. Outside the building, someone in a rental car watched the chaos unfold on a tablet screen. Sophie leaned back in the driver's seat, her hoodie pulled low over her face. Her hand shook, slightly, not from fear but release. It had begun. They tried to replace her with a lie. Now, the truth had a stage. The conference room at Gray Trust Holdings was silent, except for the shuffle of papers and the nervous tap of polished shoes against marble tile. Shareholders lined both sides of the long glass table, their faces tight, expectant, and grim. The screen at the end of the room still bore the remnants of the previous day's disaster. Lena's confession had gone viral, and questions had flooded in from every direction. Some of them were here now, in this very room, demanding answers. Others, too powerful to be ignored, had forced an emergency board session. Noah stood near the head of the table, blazer sharp, eyes bloodshot. He raised a hand, as if still believing. He could contain what was coming. Then the glass doors swung open. Sophie stepped in, not in disguise, not in shadow. Her hair was back to its natural tone, worn in a loose knot. A tailored black coat fell over her shoulders. She walked straight down the center aisle without flinching. The room's murmurs grew louder. Some stood. Others stared in disbelief. One of the older board members gasped audibly. Sophie ignored them all. She reached the table, opened the folder in her hand, and began laying out documents like cards in a final poker hand. "These are the forged medical records," she said, her voice steady. "Falsified by a paid doctor to make Lena Morgan appear pregnant." She held up a page. "Here's the financial transaction that paid for it, Noah's signature included." Another paper slapped the table. "This one is a wire transfer, $150,000 sent to the same logistics company that kidnapped me from outside the fertility clinic, sent by Gray Trust Holdings from a discretionary fund." She locked eyes with Noah. "And this," she said, sliding the last document into the center, "is a legal custody agreement, naming Lena as the child's legal mother, contingent upon my disappearance. Signed, notarized, and backdated." The room erupted. Voices overlapped. Hands shot into the air, some reaching for their phones. Noah didn't speak. His face had gone pale. He reached for the folder, but Sophie stepped between him and the evidence. "You erased me," she said. "But I'm still here." From behind, the sound of heels striking marble echoed. Lena burst into the room, flanked by two publicists and a security guard already trying to restrain her. "She's lying," Lena screamed, pointing at Sophie. "That baby is mine. She's unstable. This is a setup." Sophie didn't flinch. She stepped closer, voice even colder now. "Tell that to the DNA test," she said, holding up a sealed envelope. "The lab confirmed it this morning. Registered. Witnessed. Notarized." Lena lunged for the paper, but the guards stepped in. One restrained her as she thrashed and screamed. "He was supposed to be mine! You gave him up! You weren't even supposed to live!" "Yet here I am," Sophie said. The doors flew open again. This time, a swarm of reporters flooded in, cameras flashing, microphones pushed forward. One journalist shouted, "Ms. Gray, is it true you were kidnapped and held in hiding for over 2 months? Did your husband order it? Were you drugged while pregnant?" Another shouted, "Is the company under investigation now?" Before Sophie could speak, a woman in a navy suit stepped forward. Her badge was visible. She raised her voice over the chaos. "Marla Jenkins, Attorney General's Office. As of today, Gray Trust Holdings and affiliated persons are under investigation for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted illegal transfer of parental rights. Documents presented today have been authenticated. We're opening a full criminal inquiry." A gasp moved across the room like a wave. Noah's hand trembled at his side. Lena went silent. Then her knees buckled. The guards caught her before she hit the floor, dragging her out as she sobbed and cursed. Someone asked Sophie, "Will you take legal action?" But she wasn't listening. Her gaze had shifted to the doorway, where Dario now stood. Hands in his pockets, face unreadable. Calm as ever, she gave him a single nod. A silent thank you. Noah stepped forward looking like a man who had just realized his world was crumbling. "Sophie, please, let's just talk. Just us." She turned, facing him one last time. "No." That one word, flat and final, cut through the noise. She didn't yell it. She didn't need to. She simply walked past him, her heels clicking softly against the marble. The press parted for her like the sea. Her face was calm. Her posture, perfect. She didn't cry. She didn't stumble. Behind her, Noah collapsed into a chair. Cameras caught the moment. The former CEO, broken, caught in the ruins of his empire. Dozens of reporters zoomed in. Dozens more followed Sophie as she exited the building under the high noon sun. A child's birth certificate was reprinted that day. The mother's name? Sophie Gray. Father. Redacted pending legal review. Outside, Sophie didn't stop for interviews. She didn't look back. Dario fell into step beside her as they made their way down the courthouse steps. She fainted? He asked quietly. She screamed first, Sophie said. They walked in silence for a moment, the sounds of cameras still flashing behind them. "What now?" Dario asked. Sophie paused. "I have a nursery to finish," she said. And with that, they stepped into the waiting car. The doors closed, and the city behind them began to face a reckoning. The white ribbon stretched across the entrance of the refurbished courthouse gleamed in the late morning sun. Sophie stood before it with her infant son resting peacefully in her arms, his soft breath rising against the fabric of her blazer. To her left stood survivors, advocates, and legal volunteers. To her right, a small brass plaque was mounted on the stone wall just below the building's new name, the Dario Project, a legal foundation built to defend pregnant women silenced in custody battles, inheritance fraud, or domestic coercion. Sophie smiled softly as the oversized scissors were placed in her hand. She didn't make a speech. She didn't need one. The moment was already louder than any words. With one clean cut, the ribbon snapped and applause broke out, rolling through the gathered crowd. Inside the doors, law students, volunteer attorneys, and former victims stood ready to begin their work, pro bono, relentless, and now backed by a woman who had survived what most people couldn't even imagine. Beyond the gates, a group of protesters shouted across the street. Handmade signs waved in the air. "Justice for Sophie!" and "Lock Noah Gray up." Reporters flanked the sidewalk, detailing the unraveling of Gray Trust Holdings. Investigations had unearthed decades of shady transfers, forged deals, and laundering operations quietly supported by Noah's inner circle. Lena's assets had been frozen. Her properties were being seized. Both of them now lived under house arrest, their court dates just weeks away. Dario stood in the background, leaning casually against the fence post, dressed in a button-down shirt and worn jeans. He looked completely out of place among the legal professionals and photographers, but Sophie's gaze found him immediately. She walked over, her son nestled in one arm, a sealed envelope in the other. "I told you I don't want anything," Dario said, not even waiting for her to speak. "It's not money," she replied, holding the envelope toward him. He hesitated, then took it, slid it open. Inside was a single document, legal U.S. citizenship, signed and finalized, under his real name. "I pulled some strings," Sophie said. "It's clean. You never have to hide again." Dario looked up at her, blinking twice. "You didn't have to do this." "I did," she said. "You were the only person who did the right thing when it mattered." He exhaled, the paper crinkling slightly in his hand. "You always had a way of making a guy feel like he didn't do enough." "You saved 2 lives," she said. "That's enough." They didn't hug. They didn't cry. But in the silence that passed between them, there was more weight than any gesture could carry. Later that week, an envelope arrived at Sophie's door. The embossed logo on the corner told her everything she needed to know before she even opened it. Inside, an invitation from the board of Gray Trust Holdings, a formal request for her to return to her seat as Director of Social Impact, the very seat they had stripped from her just months before. A seat they had tried to hand to Lena. Sophie walked outside with the letter still in her hand. Her assistant, already familiar with her schedule, waited with a matchbox and a metal waste bin. Sophie stepped onto the courthouse steps, paused for the press just long enough to be seen, then struck a single match. The paper curled and blackened, the flames flickering up the board's signature before it collapsed into ash. She didn't look into the cameras. She just said, "That chapter's closed." The next morning, Sophie visited what used to be her home. The estate had been seized, auctioned off, and repurposed. The marble driveway, once host to lavish cars and private events, was now filled, with parked bicycles and sidewalk chalk. Laughter spilled out from the back garden, where volunteers and children played beneath a canopy tent. The mansion was now a transitional shelter for abused women and displaced mothers, retrofitted with individual rooms, a daycare center, a therapy wing, and a law office funded by the Dario Project. Sophie walked through the hallway in silence, past rooms she used to cry in, past stairwells that once felt like traps. At the base of the staircase, embedded in the wall, was a new marble plaque. Its engraving shimmered in the sunlight. They tried to buy her silence, but she gave voice to every woman they erased. Sophie reached out and traced the letters with her fingertips. Her son shifted in her arms, yawning, then nestling back into her shoulder. She kissed his forehead and walked toward the door. She didn't need to say goodbye. As she stepped outside, someone asked if she'd attend the trial. "I've already lived through the worst of it," she said. "Now I'm building something better." The wind picked up slightly, rustling the edge of the curtains in the upper windows. Sophie looked up, then smiled, not because of revenge or victory, but because the house, once used to destroy her, now sheltered women like her. Her story wasn't a comeback. It was a reclamation. They paid to keep her hidden, but the truth chose her to lead. If this story moved you, hit subscribe and stay with us for more.